The laundromat on Clement Street was open until 2 a.m. and smelled like detergent and something warm that was almost food from the dumpling place next door. I had a bag of laundry I'd been putting off since the week before last, the kind of practical maintenance task that lives at the exact bottom of the priority list when life is busy and rises to the top when you run out of reasons to keep avoiding it. I had nowhere else to be at midnight. These were the honest reasons I was there. Not premonition, not significance, just clean laundry and a certain restlessness that had been following me around all week. The kind that doesn't have a specific cause, and that you treat with motion rather than analysis. She was already inside when I pushed through the door, sitting on the plastic bench against the far wall, a single machine running in front of her, her coat still on, a cup of coffee going cold in her hand. She looked up when she heard the bell above the door, and then she said it. Funny. I was hoping you'd show up. I stopped. The door swung closed behind me. She was looking at me the way you look at something you've been waiting for. Not with surprise, but with a specific kind of relief. The kind that has been held back for a while, and is choosing now to show itself. The building has 4 other people who do laundry at midnight, I said. Yes, she said, but I was hoping it would be you. I set my bag down on the nearest machine and looked at her more carefully. She was pale in the way that comes from a specific kind of stress rather than cold. Her coffee had clearly been purchased some time ago. The washing machine in front of her was running, but she wasn't watching it. She had the look of someone who had made a practical, necessary decision, going to a place with windows and lights, and was now waiting to find out whether the decision had been sufficient. "Do you want to tell me what's going on?" I said. She looked at the machine. "In a minute," she said. "Sit down. I've been alone in here for an hour, and I'd like the company first, before the explanation." I sat down. I should tell you what I knew about her, before that night. Her name was Mara Denton. She lived in 5C, 1 floor above me. We had met in the elevator 4 times, once in October when she was carrying a box of files and I'd held the door, once in November when she'd been on her phone and I'd been on mine, and we'd ridden in companionable silence from the lobby to the 5th floor. Once in December when I'd said something about the building's heating being aspirational rather than functional, and she'd laughed in a way that felt like she'd been holding it back for a while and was glad for the permission. And once in January, the most recent, when she was leaving as I was arriving and we did that brief hallway negotiation of 2 people who recognize each other but haven't quite formalized what the recognition means. 4 times, roughly 6 minutes of shared space, total. And yet I knew more from those 4 brief encounters than I knew about people I'd spent months working alongside. Something about the way she occupied a room, careful, economical, always giving the impression of registering more than she was letting on, told you that there was a great deal happening behind the surface. The box of files in October, too many for a weekend move, too organized for a recycling run, the particular weight of someone transporting something they didn't want to put down. The phone call in November, kept deliberately low, the kind of quiet that isn't about the building's acoustics but about the specific sensitivity of the subject. The December laugh, genuine, sudden, quickly followed by a look of mild assessment, as if she'd been surprised into showing you something and was now checking whether it had been the right call. I had the impression, across those 4 moments, of someone who moved through the world with the specific attention of a person who has trained herself to notice. Not paranoid, alert. The 2 are different. Alert is purposeful, selective, directed outward at what the situation actually contains. I recognized it because I'd been around people who had it and people who didn't, and the difference mattered. I had filed all of this. Not consciously, just the way you file things that interest you before you understand why. And now she was in a midnight laundromat with a cold coffee and a coat she hadn't taken off, and the look of someone who had made a decision that involved being somewhere public and lit, and she was telling me she'd been hoping I'd come through that door specifically. "I didn't know you knew my laundry schedule," I said. "I didn't," she said. "I was hoping on general principle. You seemed like the kind of person who does laundry at inconvenient hours. That's either an insult or a very specific piece of observation." "It's an observation," she said. "I'm a journalist. It's how I process things." She said it in the offhand way, that people say things that are important to their identity, but that they've stopped announcing with any weight. Just a fact, like a building number. "What kind of journalist?" I said. Investigative, she said. And then she looked at her coffee, and at the machine, and at the windows that faced Clement Street, where the lights from the dumpling place were still on, and where the street was quiet but not empty. The kind that occasionally ends up in a laundromat at midnight, because going home didn't feel like the right call. She told me the surface version first. She said it simply, in the way that people deliver a version of events they know is incomplete, but are testing whether the listener can be trusted with the rest. The broad shape, the essential facts, enough to see if the listener asks the right questions or the wrong ones. Someone had come to her apartment earlier, someone she knew, someone with whom she had a history, someone she had not invited and did not want there. He had knocked and she had not answered, and she had heard him in the hall, and then she had heard footsteps toward the elevator, and then silence. She had waited 15 minutes. She had done a quiet, methodical check of her apartment. Windows, locks, the kind of check that tells you about the state a person is in. Then she had grabbed her phone, her laptop bag, a basket of laundry that happened to be sitting by the door, and she had come here. Clement Street Laundry, open until 2 a.m., visible from the street on both sides, bright enough to feel safe, busy enough on its best nights to provide the comfort of other people, even when those other people were strangers. The laundry is a prop, I said. Mostly, she said. The sheets did need washing, but I would have come here regardless. How long ago was the knock? About an hour and 20 before you walked in, and you've been here since. And I've been here since. I looked at the machine running in front of her, the sheets going around. She wasn't watching them. Her gaze was divided between her phone, the window facing the street, and occasionally the door. The kind of divided attention that isn't distraction but vigilance. How did you get here? I said. Did you walk? I walked, she said. I know the route. It's well lit. She said it the way someone says something they've thought through in advance, not to reassure me, but because the detail mattered to her, because she was a person who thought through routes and lighting and windows from every angle before she moved. I had a feeling she had been the kind of person who did that for a long time, probably before this particular situation made it necessary. Okay, I said. Okay, she said, and she looked at me with the direct, assessing look that I was beginning to understand was simply how she looked at things. Thank you for not asking if I'm all right. You're clearly all right, I said. You're here. You're thinking. You have your laptop. Yes, she said. All accurate. So you're all right, I said. You're just dealing with something. She looked at the machine. Yes, she said. That's exactly right. It was after 1 a.m. when she told me the full shape of it. I had gone next door and gotten us both fresh coffee. The dumpling place stayed open until 2, and their coffee was better than the laundromat's machine. And I came back and handed her one and sat down, and she looked at the coffee for a moment, at the specific gesture of it, someone going to get a thing without being asked, and something in her face settled a fraction. There's more to this than I told you, she said. I know, I said. I haven't told you the actual thing. I know that too, I said. You don't have to. I want to, she said. That's different. She set the coffee down. She opened her laptop. She'd had it in the bag the whole time, I realized, not as an afterthought but as the primary reason for the bag, and navigated somewhere and turned it to face me. Read enough to understand what we're talking about, she said. It was an article, unpublished, in a shared document, the title still a placeholder. Below the title was a subhead, How Meridian Development Falsified Zoning Approvals on 46 Properties Across the City, and Why 3 Planning Officials Signed Off. Below that was a dense and completely controlled piece of journalism, the kind you recognize as the real thing immediately, because the real thing doesn't announce itself. It presents, in careful order, what it can demonstrate, and allows the demonstration to carry all the weight. You can feel the 18 months in it, in the restraint, in the precision of what is said versus what is left to the reader to conclude. I read it for 7 minutes. I am not a slow reader. I handed the laptop back. This is significant, I said. Yes, she said. 46 properties. 3 officials who approved permits they shouldn't have approved. 1 developer who architected the whole scheme. And 1 person, the brother-in-law of the city's deputy police commissioner, who sits between the story and any clean path to law enforcement. She picked up her coffee. The developer is William Price. He's in everything. Commercial, residential, city contracts, charitable boards. He has his name on a wing of a hospital. A pause. He also ran a systematic permit fraud operation for 11 years. I thought about what 18 months of building this looked like. The sources, the documents, the careful chain of evidence that had to be both complete and impossible to credibly challenge. The discipline of carrying something this size without telling anyone. The isolation of it. Meridian Development, I said. I know the name. Most people do, she said. That was always part of the problem. That's part of why, she said. The other part is that Daniel coming to my building and knocking on my door and leaving when I didn't answer is not, technically, a crime. It's disturbing. It's an escalation, but you can't call the police about someone who knocked and left, and the person you'd be calling would be reporting to an institution that has a direct personal stake in the story not running. She looked at the street. He knows that. Daniel knows what I know and what I can't easily do with it, and he's been operating in that space, doing things that are deeply inappropriate without quite crossing into things that are clearly illegal. Not quite, I said. Not quite, she said, but getting closer. The second text came in at 1:22 a.m. I watched her look at it, a brief, assessing look, the kind that extracts the necessary information and then closes, and then she opened the document on her laptop and typed the timestamp and the exact text of the message. I know you're not asleep. We can do this the easy way. Add that he texted twice tonight, I said, both times after coming to your apartment unannounced. The pattern of it matters. The pattern is the whole point, she said. A single message can be explained as a misunderstanding. A pattern is a campaign. She typed for a moment. The machine behind her clicked into its final spin cycle. Outside, a car moved slowly down Clement Street and she tracked it without turning her head. A peripheral awareness that I recognized as practiced. The specific habit of someone who has learned to monitor without appearing to monitor. The car turned the corner. She looked back at the screen. Can I ask you something? I said. Yes, she said. Why me, specifically? You said you were hoping I'd show up, not hoping someone would show up. Me. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the machine. October, she said. When I was carrying the files, I came around the corner, and you were already there at the elevator, and you were clearly late for something. I could hear it in your phone call, and you held the door anyway, without hesitation, without the kind of brief calculation that people do. She paused. I've watched people calculate that moment. It's fast, barely visible, but it's there. The fraction of a second where someone decides whether holding the door costs them something they'd rather not spend. You didn't do that. You just held it. She looked at me. That is extremely useful information about a person. A door, I said. A door, she said, at the right moment. And Daniel, she said. Daniel Walsh. We worked together for 2 years at a previous outlet. He was a senior editor, I was a staff writer, and we were together for 14 months in the middle of that. She said it without drama, as the background it was, rather than the wound it might have been. He was good at his job. He had a way of improving a piece without making you feel improved, the rare kind of editorial touch that strengthens without overwriting. And then I left the outlet and this story started, and he left shortly after and went to work for a communications firm. Price's firm, I said. Price's firm, she said, which is a thing you can do. People move between journalism and communications, it happens. But he knows how I work. He knows how I sourced before. He knows what a completed Mara Denton piece looks like before it's finished, and he has been using that knowledge, not to build a counter-argument, not to challenge the reporting on its merits, but to preemptively make the question about me rather than the story. What does he know specifically, I said. About you. She looked at the window. The street was still empty. 4 years ago, I published a story at a different outlet. An early version went to print with a significant error. A source had fabricated part of what they'd told me. I caught it before the full story ran, but not before the print version was distributed. There was a partial retraction. She said it clearly, without softening it. In this industry, a retraction is something that sits in your record. It doesn't ruin you unless someone decides to make it ruin you. Daniel has been working that record for 2 months, talking to people, planting doubt, positioning the question so that when this story runs, the first conversation will be about whether I can be trusted, whether this is another error, whether I have a pattern of this. I thought about the specific cruelty of that. Using a mistake you know someone has fully reckoned with, that they've carried and learned from, as a weapon against work they've spent 18 months building. He's not challenging the facts of the story, I said. He can't challenge the facts. The facts are solid. He's challenging the person reporting them, which is a different and in some ways more effective strategy, because the facts require readers to understand context, and the attack on the person only requires them to hesitate. She turned the coffee cup in her hands. And then tonight he came to the apartment, which is the move you make when the other approaches haven't worked, and you want to communicate that you're willing to move to a different register. He wanted you to understand it had become personal, I said. He wanted me to be uncertain, she said. That's the whole game. Not convince me, not threaten me directly, just introduce enough doubt that I hesitate. And he came in person, because in person is harder to dismiss than a text, and harder to ignore than silence. She paused. The problem for him is that I finished being uncertain about this story about 6 months ago. I've had a very long time to be certain. Tonight's visit arrived somewhere in the vicinity of 18 months too late. The machine in front of her finished its cycle. She ignored it. I ignored it. Outside, a car passed slowly and she watched it until it turned the corner and was gone, and I watched her watch it. What leverage does he have? I asked. She looked at her hands. This was the part she'd been deciding how to say. 4 years ago, I published a story, a different outlet, that turned out to have a significant error. A source I trusted had fabricated part of what they'd told me. I caught it before the full story ran, but not before an early version went to print. It was a retraction, a partial retraction. She paused. In this industry, a retraction is the kind of thing that sits on the record. It doesn't ruin you unless someone decides to make it ruin you. Daniel has been very carefully positioning the retraction, talking to people, planting the question, so that if I publish this story, the first conversation won't be about what's in the story. It will be about whether I can be trusted, whether this is another error, whether I have a pattern. A preemptive credibility attack, I said. A preemptive credibility attack, she said. He's been running it for 2 months. Quietly. The kind of thing you only know about if someone tells you. And someone told me. Which is why I know the shape of what he's built. She looked at the window. And tonight he came to my apartment. What did he want? To tell me. In person, I assume, since he knew I wasn't going to answer a call. That the story would cost me more than it was worth. That I should think about whether this particular fight was worth having. She set the coffee down. He said it before on the phone, but coming to the apartment is different. Coming to the apartment is him deciding that the conversation has moved to a different register. He's not just threatening your career anymore, I said. No, she said. Or at least I'm not sure he is. The people he's working for have a lot to lose, and they've already shown they're willing to use people. She looked at me. The deputy police commissioner's brother-in-law is one of the 3 officials who signed the permits. If I file a complaint about someone coming to my home in a threatening manner, I'm filing it in a department that has a personal stake in this story not running. I asked the question I'd been holding for the last 10 minutes. When are they publishing it? She looked at me. The piece, I said. You said your editor. When does it run? A pause. 12 seconds, maybe 15. Long enough that I understood the pause was its own kind of answer. She was deciding whether to tell me, which meant the answer mattered. It ran 2 hours ago, she said. On the West Coast. It'll be fully indexed and distributed by morning. I stared at her. I sent the final files to my editor on Wednesday, she said. She said it simply, as a plain fact, without drama, in the way she said most things. We held the publication date until tonight, so there was no gap between print and digital. It is, as of approximately 9:30 p.m. Pacific, published and out of anyone's reach. She looked at her phone. Daniel doesn't know this. He thinks he's still working with a window. He came to my apartment tonight because he thinks he has time. He doesn't have time, I said. He does not have time, she said. The story is already out. What tonight is, what that text is someone who thinks he's applying pressure to prevent something that has already happened. I sat with the specific geometry of that for a moment. The knock at her door at some point in the evening. The text at 11:43. We should talk. I'm being reasonable. Daniel Walsh at her door and then at his keyboard, methodically applying pressure in the direction of a decision she'd already made 3 days ago. running plays on a board where the game was over. "He came to your apartment," I said slowly, "to stop something you'd already sent." "Yes. He doesn't know the piece is already out." He doesn't know. And when it lands in his inbox in the morning, the way it's going to land in everyone's inbox, that text, and the knock at my door, become a record of someone intimidating a journalist in connection with a story that was already published. That's not the same as trying to suppress a story. That's someone who failed to suppress it and then documented the failure. She looked at me with the specific calm that had been there since I'd walked in. Not coldness, but the calm of someone who has thought all the way through a thing and has been waiting, patiently, to reach the end of it. Which is why tonight needs to be documented. I understood then the specific quality of the relief she'd shown when I walked through the door. She wasn't afraid of the story. The story was done. The story was safe. The story was already in the world doing what it was supposed to do. What she needed was not rescue. What she needed was a witness. A person who could sit with her in a lit room with windows while the night finished and the publication cascaded through its morning cycle. A person who could help her build the record so that everything, the knock at her door, the text from Don't, the hour in the laundromat, was documented in the right order and with the right timestamps. "Show me the text again," I said, "and tell me about the other messages. Because what you have right now is evidence of intimidation in connection with a published story, and that's a different thing than a personal conflict." She handed me the phone. She picked up her coffee and held it in both hands, and the laundromat hummed around us, and the street outside was empty and lit, and we started to build the record. We spent an hour on it. I am not an attorney, and I want to be clear about that. I'm a person who has been around enough complicated situations to know what a timeline looks like when it's written down clearly and in the right order, and to understand that the value of documentation is not just the information it contains, but the discipline of the record itself. When something is written down with timestamps and specifics and a plain summary of what occurred, it becomes harder to reframe afterward. That's the whole point. You take an experience and you give it a fixed shape so nobody can tell you later that the shape was different from what it was. She was already most of the way there. She had saved every message from Daniel going back 8 weeks, had kept a log of the communications from Price's firm to her editor, had a note on her phone from earlier in the evening with the time she'd heard footsteps outside her door and the time she'd left the apartment. She had been building a record without explicitly deciding to, because building records was simply the way she moved through the world. The journalist's habit, note the detail now, you will need it later. What I added was structure and sequence. We went through everything in order. The initial contact from Price's lawyers, the campaign against her credibility, the text messages, the apartment visit, the texts from the laundromat. I asked her to narrate each element, and I asked clarifying questions where the timeline was unclear, and she answered with the particular precision of someone who has a practitioner's relationship with the truth, not elaborate, not defensive, just accurate. What happened, when, what she observed, what she can confirm from a record, and what she can only report as her experience. "You're good at this," she said, about 40 minutes in. "I'm asking questions," I said. "You're asking the right questions," she said, "in the right order." "Where did you learn to do this?" she asked. I told her. She listened the way she listened to everything, fully, without filling the silences. By 2:15 we had a 12-page document, timestamps, screenshots, a plain language summary of events, a note from me as a witness to the content and state of the second text message as it arrived. She sent it to her editor, to her attorney, to herself at a backup address, and to me. "You don't have to hold that," she said. "You said you were hoping I'd show up," I said. "I showed up." She looked at me. The corner of her mouth moved. "I meant it loosely." "You didn't," I said. She didn't argue. By morning the story was everywhere. I want to give you the texture of that morning, because it's part of the story. She had told me the piece was published, but I hadn't fully understood what published meant for something like this, for a story this size, about people this connected, until I woke up at 6 and checked my phone and saw it moving through every channel simultaneously. News aggregators, other journalists picking it up and contextualizing it. The particular cascade that happens when a story is both genuinely important and immediately legible. You don't have to understand the planning approval process to understand that 46 properties is a number, and 3 officials is a number, and the deputy police commissioner's brother-in-law is a name that connects things that should not be connected. Price's communications firm, Daniel's employer, released a statement before 8 a.m. calling the reporting irresponsible and citing the 4-year-old retraction. They'd had the statement ready. Of course they had. It had been prepared in advance, a response to a story they'd tried to prevent, polished and ready to deploy. Her editor published a response the same hour, detailed and specific about the sourcing methodology, noting that the full document record was available for independent review. By noon, 2 of the 3 officials had issued their own statements. By the following morning, there was an independent review announced. The retraction gambit failed completely. Not because people didn't see it, they did, but because the story was so specifically sourced, so precisely documented, that the question it raised about her was immediately overwhelmed by the question it raised about Price. You can run a credibility attack on a story that's uncertain. You cannot run it on a story that simply shows you the documents. Daniel texted once more, at 7 a.m. Pacific before the full distribution had completed. When did you send it? No greeting, no performance of reasonableness, just the question, which was really the acknowledgement. She screenshotted it, added it to the document, did not reply. She never replied. I didn't see her for 3 days after the laundromat. She was busy in the specific way that follows a story going out into the world. Calls, interviews, the kind of professional momentum that consumes every hour, and that you have earned and that leaves no space for anything else. I understood this and did not make it complicated. I got on with my week. I thought about the midnight laundromat considerably more than was warranted by the available information, which was its own kind of data I chose to process at a later date rather than act on prematurely. On the 4th day I was coming in from outside, late afternoon, the lobby light doing what it does in February, that low specific gold, and she was at the mailbox, and she saw me come through the door, and she said, I owe you a coffee that isn't from a midnight laundromat. You don't owe me anything, I said. I know, she said. I want to anyway. There's a difference. We went to the place on Clement Street that wasn't the laundromat. We sat at a table by the window, and the afternoon light came in at a low February angle that made everything look considered, and I had coffee and she had tea, and we talked for 2 hours in the way that you talk when the crisis is over, and there's finally room to find out who the other person actually is. She told me about the 18 months of the story, what it had felt like to follow it from its beginning, as a tip from a disgruntled contractor, through to the fully sourced 46 property account of a systematic fraud. What it had cost, specifically, the isolation of it, the way you can't tell anyone what you're working on until it's finished, and so you exist in a kind of sealed-off professional space that looks normal from the outside but contains something enormous. The discipline of maintaining the appearance of an ordinary freelance career while running a project of this scale and sensitivity. The specific exhaustion that is not tiredness but the weight of carrying something that matters and not being able to put it down. I told her about my work, what I actually did, not the version I gave at parties, the longer version with the parts that were interesting and the parts that had been hard, and the thing I'd figured out in the last year that had changed how I thought about the whole enterprise. She listened the way she listened to everything, with her full attention, asking the question that was actually inside what I'd just said, rather than the question that was easiest to ask, making the space for the answer to be real rather than polished. Can I ask you something? She said, near the end of the second cup. Yes, I said. The elevator in October, she said. When you held the door, you were late for something. I could hear it in your phone call. Why did you? You were carrying a very large box, I said. There wasn't a world in which I wasn't going to hold the door. You had somewhere to be, she said. Most people calculate that. You didn't. I held the door, I said. That's not particularly notable. It's extremely notable, she said. You can tell almost everything you need to know about a person from that moment, whether they calculate it, and how long the calculation takes, and which way it goes. She looked at her tea. You didn't calculate, which either means the calculus has become automatic, you've made the decision in advance so it doesn't require deciding in the moment, Or it means it genuinely didn't occur to you that it was optional. She paused. I decided it was the second one. And that told you something, I said. That told me something, she said. And then there were other things. The December comment about the heating. The January morning when you were clearly running late and you still held the elevator door for the woman from 3B, even though she was 50 feet away and it cost you 90 seconds. She looked at me. I've been filing things about you for 4 months. I've been filing things about you too, I said. She looked at me with the directness that I had come to understand was simply how she looked at things she found important. I know, she said. You held the door. What I've thought about most in the time since is the quality of hope in what she said that night. I was hoping you'd show up, not I hoped anyone would show up, not I was glad when you walked in. She had been hoping specifically for me, based on 4 elevator rides and a door held and a comment about heating and 90 seconds of lobby patience for a woman from 3B. She had assembled those details with the same precision she brought to assembling anything, and had reached a conclusion about the kind of person I was, and had been sitting in a laundromat with cold coffee and a very good reason to be cautious, and she had trusted that conclusion. That is a rare thing to be decided about. I don't take it lightly. And I think about the other version of that night, the one where I'd done the laundry the previous Tuesday, the sensible option, the option that an organized person would have chosen, where she'd sat alone until 2 a.m. and gone back upstairs, and the documentation had been completed without a witness. The story would have run exactly as it did, and the night would have been fine. She was capable and resourceful and had a plan she'd been executing for 18 months. She didn't need me to save anything, but she'd hoped I would come. And I came, and now we are not people who have met 4 times in the same elevator going nowhere in particular. We are people who have sat together in a laundromat at midnight and built something in the dark and told each other true things about who we are and why we do what we do, and walked out into an early morning where the city was deciding to be day again. That is not a small thing. That is not something you go back to being elevator people after. You don't go back, you hold the door and you stay. Have you ever ended up somewhere, a specific, particular place at a specific, particular hour, and found someone there who needed exactly what you had to offer, without either of you having planned for the meeting? And have you ever looked back at a string of small moments, a door held, a word exchanged in a corridor, a look that lasted 1 second longer than it needed to, and realized that you had been in the process of choosing someone long before either of you understood it was a choice? Leave your answer below. Someone is going to read it and recognize themselves. Subscribe, and don't miss what comes next.